Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Bourne Graves, author of Fire, which I'll be reading to you now by candlelight. It's kind of a funny story. I live in a hurricane-prone area, and it is hurricane season, and we have lots of thunderstorms, and then the power's out. So it's kind of ironic, since you can see from the cover, there is the theme of fire throughout the book. Kind of funny. Before I start reading, I'm just going to kind of give you some information about it, some inspiration, things like that, to let people come and watch it. Also, if you hear a lot of thunder, again, not special effects, that is going on. So the inspiration for Fire, which it is pronounced as fire, I kind of modernized it. It is the spelling of actual Old English, but I don't want to say it because I won't sound good saying it. Basically, it is book one of the Celestial Spheres. I got the idea because I read, especially in grad school, I read a lot of old text, very antiquated stuff, Greek mythology and Vico, if you know him, he's an Italian philosopher. Anyway, a lot of the times they mention the celestial spheres. And when I looked into that, it was more than just saying the heavens, which I thought it was the heavens. And what it really was the old theory of the solar system. So they thought there were elemental planets, Earth, wind, fire, water, and I just thought fire was the coolest, right? Fire can symbolize so many things, passion, anger. It's light, obviously. I'm lighting up the room right now with it. So it meant a lot on a symbolic level. So I chose that one. I may write the other ones, don't know yet. But this will be a trilogy. And it follows the story of Tori, who is from Earth, who gets transported, if you have been looking at the posts, to Fire, a different planet, technically speaking. There's a lot like our country, Britain, in the past, throughout the ages, which is why I picked Old English. And so what I'm going to read to you now is chapter 1 from Tori and a tiny bit of chapter 2. I'm skipping the prologue, which is kind of cool, but you'll have to buy it if you want to read that. So without further ado, I'll get started. All right, so chapter 1, Labradorite. Tori was utterly exhausted after the school's field trip to the Renaissance Fair and was almost falling asleep on the bus ride home. She was such a history nerd, and she had loved every minute of it, feeling as if she stepped into one of those historical romance novels her mother read and had no clue Tori borrowed. She could easily imagine herself a damsel in distress, her hero. No, that wouldn't do. Tori was no helpless maiden. She would save the hero instead. That was a bore, Jenny said. Absolutely, Amanda agreed. Tori kept her mouth shut and stared out the window. She had to hide her love of reading and history, for one never exposed such weaknesses as a love for learning to her friends. Her friends. She called them that. But she didn't really fit in with them. She didn't fit in either, being too rebellious, awkward, dorky, or just not athletic and beautiful. Tori, not having a place, fell in line with them. Just looking around at the five of them, she admitted it was a motley crew that was pretty far down the social ladder. It was one without loyalty, ready to throw each other to the wolves if it meant surviving the high school social war front. She had never felt like she belonged in her entire life, at school with other kids, even her family, so this town and school were no different. It was only temporary. Her father was in the Coast Guard, and they moved every couple years or so. She preferred it that way, for when she hated a school, they moved soon enough. When they arrived back at school, Jenny and Amanda climbed into Jenny's beat-up Honda Civic along with Tad, Will, and Fiona. They ignored her, except Will. Can we squeeze Tori in, he asked. Jenny looked at her without much sympathy. I'm sorry, not getting a ticket for overloading the car. It's fine, Tori shrugged. She was used to walking home because riding the bus as a senior was rough. She'd rather walk the mile home. Will gave her a pitying smile, but then was laughing a second later as Jenny sped off. She had a feeling Jenny didn't like her and only put up with her because of Will. And Will only liked Tori because he thought she was pretty. Some start to the school year. Maybe she would welcome a mid-year move, despite graduating in 8 months. School was only a bit worse than home. so she enjoyed a purposely prolonged walk. Tori sighed, bolstering herself, and trudged through the front door of her house. Her mother and father were standing in the kitchen, arguing again. They were headed for a divorce. The negative energy evoked by their fights weighed heavily on her, and thick tension smothering her when she entered the house. It could only be better for all of them if they split. She wasn't sure which one to live with, neither of them if she had a choice. Maybe she would emancipate herself. She was 17 after all. She didn't think she could wait another 10 months until her 18th birthday to be free of them. Tori, her father said, nodding to at least acknowledge her. It was a rare occurrence for him to note her existence. Her mother simply glared at her father still, lips pursed and arms crossed for battle. She didn't even give Tori a glance. "Dad," she said, returning the nod. She grabbed a soda can out of the fridge, noticing her presence wasn't wanted, for they stopped arguing once she walked in. "Tori, could you please go upstairs?" her mother commanded, more than asked, still not looking at her. She rolled her eyes at them and left the room. "I still can hear you bickering up there," she muttered as she stomped up the steps, well knowing she was acting like a petulant child. Well, if they were going to act immature, so would she. For added effect, she slammed her bedroom door. They must be bickering about her. They never cared otherwise about her overhearing their daily spats. Whatever they could find fault with, they would, and then they argued about it until it ended in broken vases and cars screeching out of the drive. Tori threw herself on the bed in a huff and stared at the ceiling, contemplating. She couldn't figure out why her parents were still together, or even why they adopted her in the first place, except her mother alluded to her being thrust upon them. By whom was a mystery. Tori's last name didn't match theirs. When she inquired at the tender age of 5, she was bluntly told she was adopted, and her birth parents' stipulation was that Tori had to keep her weird names so she would know her place in the universe. She was stuck with tourmaline hematite and ridiculed beyond belief for it. Not to mention her eyes. She had gray eyes, not an interesting blue gray, but a solid steel gray. Freaky eyes. Her own gaze sometimes weeded her out in the mirror, and if she was unnerved by herself, it only meant other people most likely thought worse. Her parents always thought she was odd, and they never wanted her, and she never wanted them. As a child, it hurt, as all she wanted was someone's love. This desire for love faded with the realization that she may never get it, and she grew strong, shying away from affection, friends, and boys. She didn't need them, because dreaming of things that couldn't come true only broke her, and depending on others only disappointed her when they broke promises. She was safer in her bubble. Except her parents' raised voices burst her bubble and attacked her solitude, throwing barbs at the emotional fortress she was enclosed in, threatening to break her again. Yes, she had enough. She would get herself out of here, emancipated. She would need a lawyer then. She leaned over and went to her purse and grabbed her phone to look one up when her fingers brushed against something cold and smooth. She pulled it out and examined it. A stone. A completely perfect sphere, about the size of a jawbreaker, lay in the palm of her hand. It was blue for the most part, but it had reds, browns, yellows swirled through it. It looked kind of like a tiny earth. She felt it spark in her hand. Tori dropped it on the bed. It must be one of those precious stones that held a small static charge. It must have fallen in her bag at the Renaissance fair. Or maybe one of her so-called friends thought it would be funny to make her shoplift without knowing it. But wouldn't they have called her out and gotten her in trouble if that were the case? Then she noticed the red, brown, and yellow swirls in the sphere were churning and moving about. Great. Now she was seeing things. Tori rubbed her eyes. That didn't work because the colors swirled faster, like a little storm inside a tiny orb now. It was beginning to glow brighter and pulsate molten orange like a beacon that was heating up at its core. She had the urge to pick up the piece of labradorite again. Wait a minute. How did she know what kind of stone it was? She had never heard the term before in her life. She dumped her purse out and shifted through the contents, locating her phone. At least there weren't any more freaky stones in there. Her emancipation plan put on hold, she typed labradorite into her phone. It gave her an igneous rock definition. So she was right. She gulped and clicked on the first website that talked about the stone's meaning and uses. It held magic, used by healers and sorcerers and such. That was folklore, fairy tales, not reality. She shook the thought off the thought and kept searching. She clicked on website after website, but nothing said anything about the stone glowing like a flame was inside of it, or its pattern moving. She was apprehensive and didn't It didn't help that the voices downstairs were shouting so loud she could hardly focus on what she was reading. The voices were reaching an alarming crescendo. Her mom saying, "I don't want her, you take her," followed by her dad saying, "Me? I'll be out at sea for long spans of time. You know I can't." Great, just as she thought. They were splitting up and neither parent wanted her. Even more pressing than her dreadful future was this freaky stone glowing brighter as it beckoned her to touch it. She was terrified, but truly felt as if the stone were drawing her in somehow. Tori had enough of it all. She dropped her phone on the bed and impulsively grabbed the stone. The stone was scorching hot, burning her hand. When she tried to drop it, the smooth rock was stuck as if it had fused, melted to her palm. Then a static pain radiated up her arm and shot through her entire body, making her shake uncontrollably. Her teeth chattered and her hair stood on end. This is exactly what she imagined it must feel like to be struck by lightning, and the pain seemed never-ending. But at last she fell back on the bed, her stealing fading away, and her eyes drooping closed. She was so tired. A girl's voice she didn't recognize whispered to her in the darkness, "The darkness is coming. We need your light. Come home." Then there was nothing but the darkness that the voice had foretold. All right, chapter 2, a little snippet. A missive. "Why are you sitting in your room moping?" Princess Mary challenged. Alex's sister leaned on the doorframe of his bedroom in an inelegant slouch the mother would censure her for if the queen were present. "I'm not." He realized his defensive tone betrayed him. He liked to tell himself it was merely deep thinking on important issues, but he even knew that was a lie. There are many reasons for his brooding. "What bothers you today? The threat of necromancers? Your curse? The Magicians' Guild strike? The famine in the East? Father's ailing health? Or the disappearing nobles?" Mary chided as if these things were trivial. She was teasing him, as always, and trying to make light of bad situations. It did force him to give her a small grin. The truth was, at the age of 17, he might have to take over and rule the land. All this weighed heavily on his princely mind. But what bothered him most, a worry that rendered him more anxiety than all the turmoil of his land put together, was a very different and perplexing issue. "You're forgetting the largest worry of them all," he pointed out. "Marriage." Mary's smile faded, and she walked into his room, making a humph type sound as she joined him at his table that looked out over the orchard. Mary was expected to marry soon, too. But the harassment had only begun for her recently, since she was 2 years younger. Ball after ball, soiree after soiree, pushy noblewomen shoved their daughters under his nose. 2 years thus far of this pressure. His father said to marry for beauty, his advisors for magical powers to enhance the strength of his future children, and his mother for love. So far, no beautiful, powerful, noble girl had swayed him, or honestly sparked any interest. What should have been paramount to him, instead of worrying about who he'd get shackled to, was solving the quandary about how to lift the necromancer's curse that had been placed upon him as an infant. It was a simple curse, but impossible to lift, one that allowed negative energy to weaken or influence him. It was dangerous, so dangerous some were protesting his future reign in favor of his Spitfire sister. But Mary was young and reckless. And there was a problem of her disinterest in ruling and her abhorrence for politics. "I don't see why I have to marry. You're the future ruler," Mary sulked. They were trying to marry her off at the tender age of 15, but she wouldn't have any of the suitors, and it didn't seem the suitors would have her either. She was not the court's ideal example of genteel or passive, and definitely not obedient. Their mother was hell-bent on sending her to Madame Mage's finishing school, a one-year program that promised to turn out powerful, beautiful women, and a list of suitors in hope she would settle down into a woman. "Anyway," Mary said, "Mother sent me to fetch you. We have company." "Which guy or gal's at this time? Mother's always playing matchmaker." "I didn't ask. Don't abandon me. Please come down," Mary whined, which made him feel guilty and annoyed simultaneously. His mother's request was really in order. So he straightened himself up, threw on his medallion, which was the equivalent of Mary's circlet, and then offered his sister's arm as they left his rooms. When he entered his mother's drawing room, he wanted to bolt immediately, because of one girl in the room, Justine Citrine. And if you want to know who she is and what she's up to and how Alex and Tori finally meet, you will have to buy the book. And I guess that is all. That's all I can give you today. Thanks for basically stopping by and watching. And stay tuned for the sequel, and I have another series coming. So keep in touch for that. Thanks.